From the outside, my marriage looked perfect. My husband, Daniel Carter, worked in corporate finance, well-dressed, confident, the kind of man people listened to in a room. We lived in a modern apartment downtown, attended events, hosted dinners, posted smiling photos. But the truth? Our marriage wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was dismissive. And that's worse. My husband raised his glass in the middle of a luxury party, smiled at a group of people, and said something that made everyone laugh. "She's my biggest mistake." Just like that. Like it was a joke. Like I was nothing more than a story to entertain his friends. And people laughed. Some awkwardly, some genuinely. And I stood there, holding a glass I suddenly couldn't feel in my hand. I didn't cry. I didn't react. Because something inside me went completely still. But then, someone at that party stopped smiling. He looked at me. Not at my husband. At me. And he asked one question that made the entire room go silent. And in that moment, my husband realized something was very, very wrong. "My name is Vanessa Carter. I'm 32 years old, and I live in Chicago, Illinois." And what happened that night changed everything. Daniel didn't shout. He didn't insult me directly. Not at first. It was always small things. "You wouldn't understand. That's not really your level. You're overthinking." Little comments, delivered casually, but repeated often enough. They start shaping how people see you. At events, he controlled the narrative. He introduced me as my wife. She keeps things simple. People would smile politely, and I would stand there, reduced to something small and undefined. Because Daniel was very good at presenting himself, and very careful about how he presented me. But outside of those events, my life was very different. I worked remotely, consulting, project-based, quiet work, no office, no big announcements. And Daniel used that, because anything people don't fully understand can easily be minimized. That night, the party was hosted by one of Daniel's senior clients, a high-end networking event, private venue, city skyline view, the kind of place where conversations decide deals. Daniel told me to come along. "Just be present," he said. That phrase again. Just be present. The room was full of people who looked important. Tailored suits, measured voices, controlled smiles. I stayed near the edge of conversations, listening more than speaking, observing. Because that's what I had learned to do. Daniel was in his element, laughing, shaking hands, telling stories. I watched him from across the room, and I noticed something. Every story he told had one pattern. He was always the smartest person in it. Always the one in control. Then someone asked him a casual question. "How long have you been married?" He smiled, took a sip of his drink, and I saw it. That slight shift in his expression. The one I had learned to recognize. Something careless was coming, and then he said it, clear, confident, without hesitation. "She's my biggest mistake." People laughed, because they thought it was a joke, because he delivered it like one, and for a moment, no one looked at me, except one person. A man standing slightly behind the group, older, calm, observant. He didn't laugh, he didn't smile, he looked directly at me, and then at Daniel. And then he asked something simple. "Is that true?" And just like that, the room changed. If you've ever been in a room where one sentence changed everything, you already know how powerful moments like this can be. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if someone disrespected you publicly like that? I read every single comment. When that man asked, "Is that true?" the laughter didn't fade slowly. It stopped, immediately, like someone had turned off the sound in the room. Daniel blinked. Just once. Then he forced a small laugh. "It's just a joke," he said. But no one laughed this time. The man stepped forward slightly, calm, composed. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. "You introduced her as your wife," he said, "and then called her your biggest mistake." He paused. "That's not a joke. That's a statement." People started paying attention now. Not to Daniel, to the situation, to me. For the first time that night, I wasn't invisible, and Daniel could feel it. Because control in a room like that is everything. And his was slipping. Daniel straightened his posture. "It's banter," he said lightly. "You know how it is." But his tone had changed. Less confident, more careful. Because now, he wasn't leading the conversation anymore. The man didn't argue. He simply turned to me and asked, "Do you find it funny?" And just like that, every single person in that circle looked at me. Not past me. At me. For a second, I said nothing. Because this was new. Being asked. Being acknowledged. Then I spoke. No. Just one word. Calm. Clear. And it landed harder than anything Daniel had said all night. The room shifted again. You could see it. People adjusting their posture. Reevaluating. Because suddenly, this wasn't a joke anymore. It was something else. Something uncomfortable. Something real. The man nodded slightly. Then he looked back at Daniel. "You might want to be more careful," he said. Then, almost casually, someone beside him whispered his name. And that's when I understood. He wasn't just another guest. He was one of the senior partners. One of the most respected people in that room. Daniel's face changed. Subtly. But enough. Because now he understood who he had just embarrassed himself in front of. Not me. Himself. And worse. He had done it publicly. The man looked at me one last time, then said something that no one expected. "What do you do?" Not to Daniel. To me. And suddenly, the entire room was waiting for my answer. If you've ever been underestimated in a room full of people, you already know this moment. The moment when everything depends on what you say next. Tell me in the comments, do you stay quiet? Or do you speak up? I read every single comment. What do you do? The question was simple, but in that moment, it carried weight. Because for the first time that night, no one was looking at Daniel. They were looking at me. Waiting. I didn't answer immediately, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I realized something. For years, Daniel had been answering for me, defining me, minimizing me. And now, for the first time, that space was mine. "I'm a strategic consultant," I said calmly. "I work with companies on internal risk analysis and restructuring." The room stayed quiet, because that wasn't the answer they expected. Not from the woman who had just been called a mistake. The man nodded slightly. "What kind of companies?" "Mostly mid-size firms transitioning into large-scale operations," I replied. "Financial risk, operational gaps, leadership inefficiencies." Now people were listening differently. Not politely, seriously. Someone in the group leaned forward. "Wait, which firm do you work with?" I gave the name, and I saw it. That shift again. Recognition. Because unlike Daniel's loud introductions, mine didn't need explanation. Another person spoke. "I've heard of your firm. They handle high-level restructuring cases." I nodded. Yes. And just like that, the narrative Daniel had built for years collapsed in seconds. I looked at Daniel. For the first time that night. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't leading. He wasn't controlling the room. He was quiet. Because there was nothing he could say that wouldn't make things worse. The man who started it all looked at Daniel again, then back at me, then asked one last question. Do you enjoy your work? I smiled slightly. Yes. Then added calmly, I prefer environments where people are respected. That line didn't sound sharp, but it landed exactly where it needed to. You could feel it. The energy had completely shifted. People who were laughing earlier were now distant, observing Daniel differently. Because in rooms like that, respect matters. And once it's gone, it doesn't come back easily. A few minutes later, conversation slowly resumed, but something had changed permanently. And as I stepped away from that circle, I realized something important. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't argued. I hadn't defended myself. I simply told the truth. And that was enough. If you've ever had someone underestimate you in public, you know how powerful it is to respond with calm instead of anger. Tell me in the comments, would you have handled it quietly like this, or confronted them directly? I read every single comment. We didn't speak on the drive home, not once. The city lights passed by the window, reflections moving across the glass like nothing had happened. But inside the car, everything had changed. Daniel kept both hands on the steering wheel, tighter than usual, like he was holding on to something slipping away. When we got home, he finally spoke. You embarrassed me tonight. I almost smiled, because that was the first thing he chose to say. Not an apology, not regret. Just that. I turned toward him slowly. No, I said calmly. You did that yourself. He tried to laugh it off again. You're overreacting. But the tone wasn't the same, because earlier, people were watching, and now, there was no audience, just truth. And he wasn't as comfortable with that. For years, this is how it worked. He would say something dismissive, I would stay quiet, and the moment would pass. But that night, I didn't stay quiet. And that changed the entire pattern. Why would you say something like that? I asked. He shrugged. It was a joke. No, I said. It wasn't. Because jokes don't carry truth like that. They don't land with silence. They don't make a room shift. Then he said something he didn't plan to say. I just didn't think anyone would take it seriously. And that was it. That was the real answer. Not regret. Not misunderstanding. Just assumption. He assumed I didn't matter enough for it to matter. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. This wasn't about one comment. It wasn't about one party. It was about years of being reduced, quietly, consistently, conveniently. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just said one thing. I'm not doing this anymore. He frowned. Doing what? Being treated like I don't matter. The words were calm, but final. For the first time, Daniel didn't have an immediate response, because this wasn't a situation he could control. There was no audience, no laughter, no way to redirect the moment. Just me. And the truth. That night, we slept in separate rooms, not out of anger, out of clarity. Because once you see something clearly, you can't unsee it. And once respect is broken publicly, it doesn't quietly fix itself in private. If you've ever reached a moment where you realized something in your life needed to change completely, you understand this feeling. Tell me in the comments, would you stay and try to fix it, or walk away? I read every single comment. The next morning felt different. Not heavy. Not emotional. Clear. That kind of clarity you don't get often. Daniel was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. But something about his posture had changed. Less confident. More unsettled. I poured myself coffee quietly, Didn't rush, didn't speak. Then his phone buzzed again. And this time, he reacted, quickly. I noticed his expression tighten, just slightly. What is it? I asked calmly. He hesitated. Nothing. But I already knew, because moments like that don't come from nothing. Later that day, I found out. People from that party had started talking. Not loudly, but enough. In professional circles, reputation is everything. And Daniel had just shown something dangerous. Not about me, about himself. Because if someone can publicly disrespect their own partner, what else are they capable of? And people noticed that. Over the next few days, Daniel became quieter, more cautious, less certain. The same man who controlled every room was now being observed differently, and he knew it. Because respect once lost doesn't come back easily. 3 days later, he finally tried again. I didn't mean it like that, he said. I looked at him, calm. I know. And that confused him, because I wasn't arguing. I wasn't angry. I was done. I think we should separate, I said. No drama, no raised voice, just a decision. He stared at me, as if he didn't expect that outcome, because in his mind, this was just another moment that would pass. But it wasn't. Over one comment? He asked. I shook my head slightly. No. Over years of them. And that's what people don't understand. It's never just one moment. It's the pattern. A week later, I moved out. No scene, no announcement. Just quiet action. Because the strongest decisions don't need noise. And the strangest part? I didn't feel broken. I felt lighter. Weeks later, I heard something through a mutual contact. Daniel had lost a major opportunity. Not directly because of me, but because of that night. Because people remembered. Not what he said about me, but what it revealed about him. And that's the thing about calm revenge. You don't destroy someone. You simply step out of the story and let the truth do the rest. If you made it this far, you understand something powerful. Not every response needs to be loud. Sometimes the strongest move is walking away with clarity. Tell me in the comments, have you ever chosen silence over confrontation, and it changed everything? I read every single comment. And if you enjoy stories like this, there's another one waiting for you right now. I'll see you there.